And I get asked a lot, especially by kids, what's the most intelligent animal? And it's such a loaded question because we need to start by saying, well, what does intelligence mean? We're coming at it as from a human perspective, and we come with it with this opinion of, well, I got X points on my IQ test, therefore I have X level of intelligence, and that's clearly what intelligence means. But that's a very human perspective on intelligence, and that's one that's going to be very geared towards your left brain skill set. And it's still grading according to my human senses and my human brain system processing and my human etiquette and social behavior and all those kinds of things.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brilliant Body Podcast, a forum to learn about and liberate the brilliance of your body and ultimately to expand the meaning and experience of intelligence. Join me, Mezey, and other body masters to explore pioneering and varied perspectives on what it means and feels like to be embodied. So many people feel disconnected from their bodies due to emotional or physical pain, or even conditioning and lack of education. Others feel quite at home in their bodies, yet want to learn to have more pleasure, awareness, and access to the body's guidance. This podcast is for everybody. Each one of my trailblazing guests has studied their own bodies and others' bodies for decades and will share their expertise and unique mission, how to thrive as a body. So join us and reclaim your body's brilliance. My co-producer Flo and I have wanted to do this from the beginning, not just to celebrate the brilliance of human bodies, but also of other animal bodies. And I just did not want this conversation to end with the amazing Dr. Zoolittle. And so we did two parts of it. Here's the first one. I know you're going to love this. My next guest, Penny, a British-Australian polymath, has been a film designer, lion trainer, helicopter hostess, celebrity concierge, author, and flying trapeze artist. She's lived in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, dived the barrier reef with sharks, outskied an avalanche, and had her hair styled by raccoons. However, her real profession is the world's first longevity zoologist, where she applies functional and regenerative medicine to naturally extend the healthy lifespan of animals. She is also a cognitive ethologist, specialized in animal mental health, behavior, and their relationships with people. Affectionately known as Dr. Zoolittle, Penny's signature approach rewilds animal health and happiness by combining the robust strategies of wild animals with cutting-edge longevity biology. As well as a consultant for zoos, she teaches how to stop inadvertently shortening your pet's life and shows you how to help protect animals from age-related diseases. Joy and vitality is definitely a way to describe Penny herself. I met her because she was possibly going to dog sit for the noosh while I was gone. And we immediately hit it off, even though the dates didn't end up working out, and we still have not met in real life. But she's been a joy to be in correspondence with over this past year or two. And I finally got to speak with her today about the brilliant bodies of animals. Hello, hello.
Amazing. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, we've never actually visually met, so it's very
kind of uncanny.
beautiful face. So let's see. I have so much to ask you. I've been waiting so long to be able to get to talk to you about the intelligence of animals, among other things. But I was looking at your website last night, and I happened to notice that under About, there was not very much about you, my dear. And so I just wanted to start with that and find out more about you and what you were like as a child, how you've related to animals since I assume you were very young, and what has that journey been like to become Dr. Zoolittle, which is just so exciting to learn more about.
I mean, are we rolling now?
We're rolling, baby. We're rolling.
Okay, thank you for asking. That's really kind. And it's a little unusual because it's a career pathway that doesn't really exist. And that became pretty apparent pretty early on, and everyone tried to dissuade me and point me in other directions. They're like, oh, well, if you love animals, you need to be a vet. And I'm like, I don't want to be a vet. I don't want to be around all the sad animals. And I would break my heart to see sadness every day like that. I could never put an animal down. So game over when it comes to that. They said, oh, okay, well, in that case, you need to go be an ecologist then and work out in the field with the animals and watch them through telescopes. And I'm like, no, but I want to be friends with them. Okay, well, you can't live in Disney World. And so they said you couldn't do that. But anyway, it all started for me. My earliest memories are actually of the little chickens and the guinea pigs at kindergarten. So I think I was 3, and then Sandy, the great golden retriever who lived next door, who was about 4 times the size of me. And then when I was 5, we went to the zoo with school. And I'd been to the zoo before. Melbourne Zoo is an amazing zoo. Been there before, but this was the first time I'd ever seen a human go inside the enclosure. And it blew my mind. I was like, everyone had always told me, you can't play with wild animals. Wild animals are dangerous. Wild animals will hurt you. Wild animals are scared of you, blah, blah, blah. And yet here was a wild animal, because I knew it wasn't a dog or a cat. It was a wild animal who had friends that were human, and the human was in there feeding, training, playing. Everybody was happy. And I was like, that is it. That is my mission in life. I am going to be one of those people who makes animals happy. So that's really the start of the journey. And I've never let anyone dissuade me from that or tell me that it was impossible. I said, listen, I was 5 years old. So I'm going to be a zoologist. I'm going to be a zookeeper. And then they said, okay, so that's great. But the questions would always come, because grown-ups love to ask kids, what are you going to do when you grow up? And, we categorize so well, and we just put all that on kids. And so as kids, you're forced to go, oh, it's going to look like that. And then some grown-up comes along and pops your bubble and says, well, that doesn't exist. And so I was just maybe a little bit more resilient than some of the other kids on the block who, you want to be an astronaut, or you can't do maths, so you can't be an astronaut. Oh, all right, then I was like, no, I'm still going to be doing my thing.
Yeah, but even that, you aren't just a zoologist. You strike me as somebody, well, you are also an ambassador. So you go into each given environment like a zoo, but then you're the bridge person out of it to the rest of the world, of the domestic world of animals, for example, or the humans that you need to translate for to also make their animals happy. I call people like you and like me bridge people, because you're not just even one thing. Besides, I mean, look, your bio describes all these different wild things you've done in your life. So clearly you're a weaver of so many different disciplines, interests, sensibilities, and capacities. And I imagine that hasn't been easy, because you're not just one thing.
I don't think anyone is just one thing, but no, there are times when there are some people who are very clear cut about who they are and what they're interested in, and they've got very tight boundaries, and that's great. But that was never me. Imagine picking subjects at school for me. It was just ridiculous. I wanted to do everything. So whether it's nature or nurture is a very good question, because I was always one of those kids who's like, I'm going to do 75 different extracurricular things, and I'm going to overload on my coursework, and I'll take extra classes and do a double degree. And it was just like more, because the curiosity just cannot be satisfied. But then at the same time, you've got to question, well, was that the path that I was almost forced to take because there wasn't a clear-cut runway for me to go from being this 5-year-old with stars in her eyes about working with sea lions to having a real career working with animal mental health and happiness, and removing any impediment to a fantastic quality of life for them, which is really the ultimate goal with Dr. Zoolittle, my company. So without a clear pathway, you're like, well, I have to cherry pick a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because I'm putting together a completely unique recipe. And
Yes.
I am going to need something from the human neuroscience department, and I am going to need something from the agricultural department for animal welfare, and I am going to need something from the zoological department in terms of animal structure and function and animal behavior, and then outside of faculty almost, then I'm looking at all manner of other things. I mean, I did an interior design degree and a liberal arts degree as well in diplomatic relations and European studies. How would you think that politics, history, art history, literature, philosophy, and these other things, but somehow they do tie in. And the interior design degree has been fabulously useful when it comes to doing enclosure designs in the zoo, because when you're working with a zoo enclosure, you've got multiple parties, if you like, that need to be looked after. You have, of course, the animal and their requirements, their needs for having somewhere stimulating, safe, whatever to live. But you've also got to make that so that visitors can enjoy an aesthetic experience of looking at the animal. The viewing is possible for them. And you've also got to think about the keeper's point of view. They've got to go in there and have access and be able to clean it and bring the broom and the wheelbarrow and the hose and the bucket and all those things. So if the doors are too small, the slope is wrong, or any of those. So there's a whole multitude of layers you've got to work with. So it's a very complex design. And then if you're going to actually really, really bring the welfare into it, then you're going to be looking at some relatively advanced things like, oh, how can we allow the animal to choose the type of environment that they have? So we give them a framework that meets all those standards for welfare and safety and so forth. But then we'll have a whole series of buttons, those big red push buttons that you can use, for example. So now the animals can use their paws or their noses to hit these buttons and dim the lighting, turn on the bird song, put their waterfall on or off. So there's some level of control to their environment so that they can start to express some of their personality, some of their preferences and things like that. So, the skill set from interior design has really come across quite cleanly, but I've no doubt that pulling from all manner of other areas of interest have all woven together to create this thing that is, as far as I can tell, pretty unique. I haven't found someone else who is a longevity zoologist looking at the physical in the body. How can we biohack those cells to give them the best possible protection from ever getting a disease in the first place, and then optimize that to extend lifespan to its natural fullness, but at the same time bring in all of the mental health and behavioral neuroscience, cognitive ethology, anthrozoology, which is human-animal relationships, trust-based, loving. So it's a very big parcel when you wrap it all up. So yeah, I would like to meet someone else who's on the same pathway that I can talk with, but it's an amazing position to be in.
I love it, Penny. I feel like you're just making up for centuries of misunderstanding and disrespecting the animal world. It's so heartening for me to hear this. And before I continue, in the place I'm staying, there is a bird that, oh, nope, it sees that I just tried to turn my computer to show you. Multiple times a day, it smashes itself up against the window at the very top of the window, probably 20 times, at least 20 times a day. And it does it to all the windows. Apparently, it does it to the window in the car as well. And I've never seen behavior like this. So I was also curious, since we were talking when this started happening, whether that's also the kind of thing that people bring to you, not just how to help their animals live longer and prosper, but also deal with these sort of strange, or what seem to me as a human, strange behaviors that I cannot explain.
Absolutely. Unraveling behavioral mysteries. There's always a challenge. I'm not going to say that it's easy every time, because it's really not. You've got to do a lot of detective work, and sometimes we just don't have those missing pieces of information. But I certainly find it a lot easier than what I see most people do, because we can't help it. We are human, and we look at our world through human lenses. So human lenses are going to be all of our human perceptions. And we can get into some of this later on, because I think that's going to tie into really some of the direction we might want to take this. But the perception is how, well, with my sensory organs, I'm receiving information from the exterior environment. Like if my eyes weren't there, I couldn't tell you that you were in somewhere with a wooden background and that your hair was down around your, like, I just wouldn't know because I can't see. But my eyes have given me information in, so now I can process that and make various decisions or behaviors accordingly. And so that's the same with all of my modalities. So the information is going to come in depending on what modalities we have and how they are tuned. Second layer then is, well, how am I going to filter that? How am I going to process that with my brain? Because there's so much information that I have to block out a good chunk of it because it's irrelevant, it's background noise, it's not meaningful. And so our brains automatically do that, and so do the animals. So the information is being received, but then what we're actually cognitively aware of is actually a pretty small fraction of that. That then goes through the lens, if you like, of, well, what is relevant? What is important? What is meaningful? What is something that's going to help me in my day? What do I like or not like? And then on the basis of all of that, we usually get the behavior, the action, the output. So if you don't understand, as most humans don't, that what an animal's sensory world looks like, then we just automatically assume that they're seeing and hearing and smelling and touching and whatever the same that we are. And it's not true. And
Mm.
then we're going to automatically assume, except we're not even aware that we do this, that they're going to have the same value system and etiquette and other things that as a human we do. And of course they don't, because they're a totally different species. So when we see a behavior, we say, well, they did that for no reason.
Mm.
There's no chance that an animal ever does anything for no reason. There's always a motivating factor behind that. Okay. It's usually an emotional reason, because emotions drive us more than intellect does. We remember emotional memories more than we remember abstract things. I could say to you, your 21st birthday party, or the day that 9/11, for example, you're going to have some fairly visceral memories about those occasions, because there was so much emotion wrapped up in that day. But if I said to you, what did you have for breakfast last Wednesday? You'd be like, and it's so much closer in time, but there's no emotion wrapped around last Wednesday, unless it was your birthday, for example. So the emotion driving the behavior is a key thing as well. And if you don't understand animal emotions correctly, or you believe they don't have them, then you are going to fall prey to this idea that, well, they did that for no reason, or they did something inexplicable or something stupid. And we start to put value systems on the output, and we can't unravel why. And if it's a desirable behavior, well, no big deal. We just go, oh, that's so cute, they do this thing. But if it's an undesirable behavior, then it can cause people to really have a lot of tension in their relationship with that animal, because they're like, this animal's really bugging me. Like, I can't understand why they do this. I just want to help and I can't do it, or they're messing up and breaking things or being destructive, whatever it happens to be. So undesirables are really dangerous. So yes, I do sit there as a detective a lot of times and say, okay, let's unpick how that works, so that you can start to understand that your dog is actually seeing primarily through their nose, for example. They're not seeing primarily through their eyes the way we do. So let's take that a minute. Let's actually look at the perspective of where your dog's eyes are, because they're not up here with yours. They're down here somewhere, depending on the breed, right? But they're down here somewhere. And you start to layer in 25 different reasons why they're thinking and processing differently. And all of a sudden people go, oh my goodness. Okay. And then I say, and did you know, in terms of their culture or their social life or their lifestyle as a predator versus a prey species or whatever else, this is their value system now. So their natural behavioral repertoire is X, Y, and Z, which of course is not how a human behaves. So there's just layer that you sort of dig through until you get to that's why they're doing it.
The way you speak, and I believe I know you well enough to know, it is obvious to you that animals are sentient, they're intelligent, they're emotional. They have all these capacities that a lot of humans deny or don't recognize. And myself, as a small child, it was absolutely obvious to me, all of those things. And I was ridiculed a lot for it, actually. And some of that, I think, was from my own trauma, that I couldn't really relate to a lot of humans. So I was much more attuned to the animal world, which I think a lot of people are. Though it also seems to be quite natural for children to constantly be lit up and pointing to animals and responding to them so
Mhm.
instinctually and intuitively. So I'd love for you to just talk about that, about what sounds like is obvious to you, the intelligence of animals.
Well, I believe it is. All of those things, consciousness, emotion, sentience, all of those things. And I mean, Occam's razor stands pretty far in front when you've got to look at these questions, because the evidence that we can see from childhood, but ask anybody who has a dog. They will say, I understand my dog communicates in this way, I understand what they need, we have this relationship, I love them, they love me. So when you get on the subjective side of the point, there's consensus. Every child will tell you that an animal is feeling a particular emotion or is aware of what they're doing or something. It's just obvious. And it's once we start to get over intellectual about it that we go, yeah, but, and bring in all these caveats that, it may be worth viewing it and asking those questions. But let's not get bogged down in something Descartesian that doesn't need to be so artificial and forced upon us, when the overwhelming evidence and common sense is the antithesis. So yes, that they they have all those things. I wrote my neuroscience dissertation on the secondary emotions in non-human mammals. Most everyone else was in the medical school writing it on a human, so I had to put non-human mammals at the front there to really just to articulate that I'm talking about animals here. But primary emotions are the sort of the base ones, if you like, the core instinctive kind of emotional thing. You're not even cognizant about it, it just comes out. But then your secondary emotion's the one that's sort of processing it. So something like shame or guilt or things, those are secondary emotions that come out of something like anger or fear or whatever, a more base one. And so there's positive ones as well. From a neuroscience point of view, literally a cellular thing in the brains, we can prove that they have secondary emotions. So you don't even need to have this argument unless you're holding a particular agenda reason, in which case, well, good luck to you, but we're probably not going to go very far in our conversation.
It is upsetting. I do find it quite shocking that people often just think that animals are dumb. From my perspective, most people think of their bodies as dumb, similarly to animals. Well, okay, they're alive and they're flesh and they move around, they're ambulatory, but they certainly don't have any kind of consciousness or agency. So that's my theory, that if you can't experience your body as sentient as who you are and as brilliant, then you're not going to experience animals that don't communicate verbally in the way that we do as brilliant, or at least self-aware.
You're right. The body does have intelligence. We know, for example, our immune system, just to pull one example, has an innate component and a learned component. Well, how are you going to have a learned component if you don't have intelligence, if you don't have some kind of memory faculty? But no one in medicine is going to argue that there are two halves of the immune system. We know that. This is why people get a vaccine. You're teaching the immune system to be familiar with a new foreign body that is deleterious and causing a response to those cells to come forth and do that. And then they hold that memory so that if you ever encounter that pathogen in its wild phenotype, you are not going to fall prey because your immune system says, I've seen that before. I know I've got some soldiers that are going to defeat that. I know exactly how to get rid of them. And out they come and you survive. We know that all of our DNA is intelligence. It is a code. And a huge percentage of that code is actually non-coding for the actual proteins, which is the active part of the DNA. And the rest of it is on other types of intelligence, other types of consciousness even. So we're only just really scratching the surface. I mean, they used to think that if we could just interpret the entire genome, we would understand human. Well, we don't, because that's about 3, I think, percent of the overall mass of DNA. The other 90% is this. So we're only scratching the surface having decoded the genome. But intelligence is such a weird question, and I get asked a lot, especially by kids, what's the most intelligent animal? And it's such a loaded question because we need to start by saying, well, what does intelligence mean?
Yeah.
Again, we're coming at it as from a human perspective, and we come with it with this opinion of, well, I got X points on my IQ test, therefore I have X level of intelligence, and that's clearly what intelligence means. But that's a very human perspective on intelligence, and that's one that's going to be very geared towards your left brain skill set. So we've also now got this thing, oh, we've got EQ. Oh, EQ, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence. What can you do on the right side of the brain, and your people skills and interpretation and some of those other things. But again, it's still coming from that human thing, and it's still grading according to my human senses and my human brain system processing and my human etiquette and social behavior and all those kinds of things. It's also based on my skill set because I can't fly. So you could say that a bird is more intelligent than me because a bird has a superior skill set to me. I can flap my wings like crazy if I want to, but I'm not lifting off. Whereas a bird just goes and they're doing it. So, well, the bird is more intelligent than me by that argument, which obviously is foolish, right? The dolphin is more intelligent than me because they can do somersaults and twizzly things in the air when they breach out of the water. Or the shark is more intelligent than me because he can breathe underwater and I can't. So intelligence, just because I can do applied calculus, for example, or design a zoo enclosure and a shark can't, doesn't make, because you're comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah.
So intelligence of animals is really you almost need to just throw that in the bin in some respects, because every single animal is its most intelligent version thus far. It's like your iPhone came out whenever it did, and it was iPhone Mark 1, and now there's iPhone Mark however many, but there've been these developments, and the intelligence, if you like, of the phone has improved over time. Well, we see that in evolutionary sense, right? So environments are changing all the time. Dynamics outside land is changing, right? And animals need to be flexible to cope with that. So if there's a landslide and their hole gets buried in the mud, then they've got to go and live somewhere else and build a new hole and maybe build it better than they did before. They've just acquired more intelligence and solved a problem. So they're flexible to their environment. And over time, we see that the species refines itself in its skill set or its ability to camouflage or in whatever else. So it's improving its intelligence in that sense because it's the survivor, and all the ones that were quote unquote less intelligent are the ones that didn't make it through evolutionary time of development. So there's that argument to be made about, well, every single animal that we see today is the most intelligent because otherwise they wouldn't be here. They hadn't cracked the code of how to survive. And here's a point as well. We focus so much on survival as the main point for intelligence or about life. Can you survive? Can you thrive in the world? Can you, whatever it is that is a mark of success? But that's one side of the coin. How much are we looking at the flip side, which is how much pleasure are they getting out of life? How much are they able to appreciate the sunset, for example? And we know that gorillas and bears and other species will actually stop their day, stop their activity, even in the middle of building a nest or doing something that's really quite an absorbing task, and we'll stop and we'll just appreciate the sunset for about 20, 25 minutes, something like that. And then they get back to work again. They go back to what they were doing, but they will stop and appreciate. There's an artistic pleasure there. Play. Animals love to play. Now, some animals have more time than others to do that. So if you're a grass eater and you've got a big body, then you're going to spend a lot of time eating to get enough calories just to keep going. So a big part of your day is going to be eating grass. So you don't have a lot of free time. If you're a meat eater, for example, or eating nectar and pollen and these kinds of high calorific foods, then you don't have to spend so much time eating because every mouthful is giving you more value. So now you can do your eating in 1 hour and you've got 4 hours of free time. What do you want to do with your free time? Well, I want to go play. I want to go explore. I want to go and do some problem solving. I want to hang out. So all of that is motivated by the pleasure side of things, which you could argue this is where you learn things. This is where you improve your intelligence. This is where you take in different experiences and expand your horizons. The animals are the same as us in so many ways.
Yeah. I want to add too, because I look at a lot of cows, a lot of sheep around where I live, and the societies that are clearly, deeply bonded are so obvious when you're spend any time watching these different herds of animals, including birds as well, though it's harder to see their emotionality from a human, from my perspective. But there's clearly so much affection, and people tend to view animals as not individuals who don't have specific invested relationships, dare I say, even love relationships. And I'd love for you to speak about that too, because obviously, when you're working with animals all the time, and as we do with being around dogs, it's clear they have personalities and that they're individuals. But usually, people don't extrapolate towards sheep or spiders or a bird and don't assume they also have these individual, again, self-aware experiences that differentiate them from the other beings of their kind or other beings of other species with whom they interact.
So one of the ways that we ascertain emotion or experience or what's going on is the face. We're a visually driven species. We use our eyesight as our primary force. And in human culture, eye contact is showing interest, showing respect, and all those sorts of things. So we're very focused here for a lot of information. And we have relatively plastic faces. I can show all kinds of different expressions with my face. A dolphin, for example, has a very fixed face. So it doesn't matter what mood the dolphin is in, what emotion that dolphin is feeling, you don't see a change in the face. You will see change in behavior, but you won't see it on their face. But because we're more tuned to face reading than we are to interpreting behavior, we look at the dolphin and always think that they're smiling and happy, and we have great affection for them because they look so joyful, and we're naturally drawn to that. But there are plenty of other animals that don't have those flexible faces. So we automatically ascribe then, oh, well, they don't feel anything. You know, a sheep doesn't have a particularly flexible, mobile, plastic face to show all of those feelings. However, when we do studies in individual recognition skills, every sheep in the flock knows every other sheep in the flock by sight. It's been a minute since I read those papers, so I can't tell you whether or not they designed the study to protect against other cues, for example, the smell of each particular sheep that would have maybe a signature fragrance to them or whatever. So I don't know if they accounted for that, but certainly when they were, I think they were actually showing photographs, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway.
Wait, sheep could identify individual sheep through just photographs?
Yeah, of the sheep that they know.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because I live across the fence often from sheep that come through, and they all do look different. I can see that they look different. I couldn't identify them through photographs, but they definitely all look different. They look like different beings. They are different beings, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. I'm so excited to hear more.
So, I mean, so individuality, individual personality, individual life experience, again, common sense will tell you that even if I had a twin, her life experience and my life experience, her emotion and my emotion, they may be very similar a lot of the time, but they're not the same. And if I'm abroad and she's at home, for example, and I'm doing something and she's on a great date and I just broke up or whatever it might be, we're
Yeah.
not going to feel the same thing. We're going to have two different life experiences. I just got on a plane and traveled somewhere. She went to sleep and had a normal day. So every individual body, whether it's a sheep or a spider or me or whoever, has their own life experience. And again, a child of 5 knows this. It shouldn't be a big scientific question that we have to ponder for too long. But every I'm going to be careful how I say this now, but I, because I can't go and prove it for some of the things, because again, you're not going to do a study in every single species on the planet to then just make the point to say, okay, now we can say with absolute clarity every single animal. But really, every single animal has its own life experience. It has its own way of perceiving the world and processing and understanding what it means to be alive and do their own things, and knows that their body ends at the end of their legs, head, and whatever. Not even a spider sitting there going, oh, the web is part of me, or this air in front of me is part of me, or the fly that I'm eating is part of. No, they all know that that's a separate thing. You're very aware that the wall behind you and the bird in the room and the microphone and everything is not part of you. You are this piece here, and then it's not. That's self-awareness, right? You don't need to be able to do recognition in a mirror test, although that is a nice, elegant way of showing it for some species that have the ability with their eyes to look and perceive a two-dimensional image and be able to recognize that that is actually a thing and blah, blah, blah. So it's relying on a bunch of other cognitive abilities to identify self-perception when we don't need to have something so complicated, because every animal is very aware that it starts here and stops there. You see even in a coral reef with thousands of animals all in very tight packed environment, that they're like, oh, you come near me, I'm going to jump away from you. It's like, I know that you're not me.
Yeah.
So self-awareness should be self-evident. The emotions, as I say, we focus on the face, but again, just look at the body. Animals are communicating through body language, through other vocalizations, other signals and signs. Pheromones, for example, we can't sniff their pheromones, right?
Mhm.
But a moth can detect one molecule of pheromone from the female from like 5 miles away.
Mm.
I mean, what sense of smell is that? That's insane. But
Yeah.
if you're ever going to have a moth marriage, you've got to be able to find each other. Their eyes aren't that great, so they kind of do sniffing. It's kind of cute, really. But so I could say, well, this moth is more intelligent than me because they can do this thing. If I looked at the moth's face, could I see that the moth was super happy that he just found a girlfriend? I couldn't read that, but is he feeling that? Well, they're mating, so it's, there's a clue.
Indeed. So let's talk about what humans call telepathy. Because
Mm-hmm.
from our perspective, or some of us could look at what they're doing and how they're communicating as telepathic with each other and or with us. I mean, even the fact that my dog won't bark when I roll up the driveway, but she barks when everybody else rolls up the driveway. Is it that she's smelling the particular gasoline that's in my car, how my car sounds? Or is there some way that she intuitively knows that it's me? So she stands up. When I look in the window, she's standing up right in front of the door, but she is not barking. How do
Mm-hmm.
you explain things like that in the interspecies communication aspect and or just amongst themselves and how they're communicating? Do you feel like there is something beyond, P male, for example, where yes, they're exchanging and communicating, I think, in great detail. They're able to
Mm-hmm.
excrete whole gazettes of information to each other. I have no doubt that they're describing, explaining, asking questions, coming back around, having, complex social interactions through chemical exchange. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but it certainly seems to be that
Yeah.
case. So, what about communication? And do you think to some extent it is telepathic? And therefore, what even is telepathy if it's what they're doing? Because again, we don't know to what extent it's a chemical component, or maybe you do. I don't. I want to learn more.
So going back then 1 second, the animals are, I mean, we do it too. A lot of this is unconscious, but we're receiving a whole lot of information without realizing it. And then the brain is working on that without our conscious awareness of that. And then we end up with some kind of conclusion and then can make a decision and behavior on the basis of that. There's a lot of threads coming together. So for a dog that's recognizing that you're coming home, not the postman or somebody else, they're putting together sound of the car, the time of day, the smell on the wind, multiple strands of information to then synthesize a conclusion. Most humans live to some kind of a routine, and certainly most of us will drive the same car every day. So there are patterns and familiarities there that the dog, and they are intelligent, let's be real. Like going back to the sort of more familiar form of the word intelligence, they can put that stuff together. They've got cognitive abilities to do that. So is there telepathy? Well, in that instance, I wouldn't say that there really was. There's too many physical, if you like, whether it's electricals, fragrance oriented, time oriented. I mean, how do you physically pick up time? But these are material things in the space-time continuum, if you like, that the dog is working with or any other animal is working with. And when it becomes intra-species, two dogs, they speak their own language. You know what I mean? They've got their own way. Again, going back to say family or a twin would be a strong example, but you can sometimes finish your own family sentences. You can sometimes say exactly the same thing at the same time. You can sometimes pick up the phone to call each other at the same minute because there's something in the family thing that is just, you're so close that there's somehow a connection. And if you want to get subatomic particle about it, quantum mechanics and things, I mean, there's quantum entanglement and that's a real thing. And there's observational effect of what happens when you look at a particle, when you don't look at a particle, and how they're attracted, and how when a particle is separated or at certain speeds or whatever, they know what every other particle of the same thing everywhere global, like universally, is doing. I mean, there's some really gnarly stuff inside quantum mechanics that will say that we are all quantum entangled in some way. So
Yeah.
is that then telepathy? Well, maybe that's the name we've given it to kind of understand that. But
Yeah.
another point I wanted to make in that is we know that our heart has this electrical thing going on. That's the thing that's doing the spark. And electricity has a force field. We know that. We wrap electrical wires in non-emitting materials so that the force field stays contained. And you can pick up with various sensors and things if there's electricity or EMF or other things that are leaking. Again, we can't see them, we can't smell them, but something can detect that and tell us that those things are there. So we've done tests and things to show that the heart has an electromagnetic force field that extends significantly beyond the boundaries of the body. So the physical body ends where my barrier of skin layer is, and then outside that is some air, right? But beyond that physical piece is this electrical piece that is going further afield.
Mm-hmm.
And mood and chemistry and things in your body have effect on that field. And again, we can detect this with instruments. It will show you that get closer and closer, and there's the wall, there's the edge, if you like, of that person's force field. So technically, that's the edge of where they are, even though their body's over here.
Yeah.
So question then is, well, can other animals detect electrical force fields? And we know for sure that some sharks can, because that's how they're finding their prey. The hammerhead shark has its great big paddles and it's full of electrical receptors all through here. The duckbill platypus does the same thing with their bill, and they've got electroreceptors there. So what they're doing, because they're both in very silty, low light, bad environments, they're not relying on their eyes to find it. They're feeling the electrical pulse range or force field of the fish that are hiding under the sand at the bottom of the sea or the bottom of the river. And then they're using this device that their body's created to go, oh, there it is, and then they eat. So some animals can feel that, can detect that, can use that. Can all of us do that with one of those unconscious abilities that we can't perceive, but we're able to know? Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's what we mean by telepathy.
Well, I wanted to say that in the family constellation world and the world of personal geometry that I facilitate and teach, we call it somatic resonance, which is another version of what you're describing electrically, how one body is able to behave like an antenna with an
Mhm.
intentional spin of the dial, you could say, to attune to any particular person, thing, or sensation, or just looking at spatial relationship gives us all kinds of, you could even call it electrical or emotional emanations that we make meaning with. We have a feeling in our body if we see a certain geometry of spatial relationships that are diagramming our experience of a relationship and we place them externally. Other people, including ourselves, can then experience the sensational quality or dissonance in that configuration. So we're doing it too, like bats and dolphins, and as you
Mhm.
said, hammerhead sharks, where we are pinging off of each other all the time. And of course, gleaning all kinds of information with greater and greater detail for those of us who spend time and care to really delve into it. It's so fascinating. I love how just by describing these other animals' capacities and behaviors, you're reflecting to us capacities that humans also have, but that we tend to take for granted or not even ever notice, let alone really develop and utilize conscientiously. It's really, really great. I love that I have more in common with a hammerhead shark than I realized. But I do want to tell you, Penny, this is a little embarrassing. I think I've only told maybe one person this, but I happen to love spiders a lot, and particularly most, not all. I can be afraid of them too, but I find them quite fascinating, and they have qualities that I so don't have, like patience and stillness. So usually let them live around me and I'll
Mm.
watch them, and I just find them quite interesting. And I'm always appalled by, you could call it, the genocide that people are
Mm.
programmed into committing against many species, particularly insect species. And I understand they can be frightening and unnerving and all of that, but most of the time you leave them alone, they're just going to do their spider thing. So I was watching a jumping spider, which they're so adorable, those little things, and I thought, what the hell? I'm just going to try an experiment. And I just started focusing on it. And I thought in my mind, just move to the left. And I swear to God, it moved to the left. And then I asked it to move like diagonally up to the right. In my mind, I didn't speak anything. I visualized it in my mind. And this tiny little thing, it flippin' moved up diagonally in the direction that I was visualizing in my mind. And I thought, wow. I mean, of course, there's all kinds of people, including yourself, all over the world who are communicating, whether it's with their dogs or with much more different species than we are. But I just find that so spectacular that we actually have these capacities that far exceed what we're untaught to recognize within ourselves. Because, of course, kids are doing all kinds of stuff all the time, talking to things that supposedly
Right,
don't exist. Yeah.
right.
What do you think
So
of that? Do you think the spider actually was somehow receiving my electrical, visual, or imaginary, or sensational, or chemical input and was really doing what I thought it was?
So I kind of have a couple of answers to go with that. So at the end of the day, I am a scientist, so I'm going to look for a scientific understand things because that's a lens that we can use to understand the world. It doesn't mean that it's always the right lens to use because if I apply my scientific method to understanding history, it's not going to work very well, right? I need to have some primary texts and some secondary sources. I need a different toolkit. But a scientific lens can be very good at understanding and unraveling questions, which is why we have the scientific model. At the same time, I'm still a person. You scrape off the scientist, and I'm still a human underneath. And the human underneath has a whole set of like preconceived notions and opinions and wishes and things. And in that sense, I very much like to live in a magical Disneyland where the animals do talk to the people, and we do have all of this kind of romantic notion of harmony and all good things. So part of me wants to say, yeah, of course he did. Of course he understood and did it because that's the world we live in. And at the same time, the scientist is like, Well, okay, so let's break that down then. So, what do we know about animals and their ability to do this? And what does a thought, an intentional thought, does that have substance? Does that have some chemical signature? Does that have some electrical signature? And I'd argue it does have electrical signature because your brain is electrical as well. You put the little cap thing on and some machine at the hospital goes beep, beep, beep and starts measuring waves of electricity. Well, that's your brain. So does your brain have a force field that is also pushing out beyond your body? Does that carry information that then can be received by, yeah, why not? I think these are very valid questions. And then if you want to sort of go more on the, I guess it's kind of a hybrid of the two, this is sort of a spiritual dimension as well as a physical thing. We know that we are spirit, soul, and body. We're made up of three components. We've got the physical body, the flesh, blood, and bone. We've got the soul, which is the mind, will, and emotion. So that's my thinking, that's my feeling, that's my, I'm going to decide to do the taking control of things. And I can't pick that up and show you what that bit looks like. That is somewhere living inside of me. But you see that manifesting when I do behaviors or when I talk and show expressions on my face and all those kinds of things. And then there's the spiritual side, which is sort of like the connection or communion, if you like, of coming together. It is the wisdom and those kinds of aspects. It's probably where I actually have my life force, if you want to describe it that way. What makes life? No one's ever been able to copy life and put that in a petri dish or a jar. You can put all of the ingredients in, all of the carbon and some oxygen and some water and some things and the right kind of pressure and and you're never going to get life spontaneously happening inside that jar. You cannot synthesize life. Only life can beget life. So where is that life force that then extinguishes? And if I'm dead, I'm going to still look the same as I look now, except I'm not moving, I'm not animated. You're not going to know if I'm dead or alive until you feel my pulse or look at my temperature or these other things, because I don't change. So the life force probably is there. So anyway, going into that, we know the animals have these things too, because they're alive, they're animated, they're moving, they've got knowledge, they've got connection with each other. They've also got mind, will, and emotions. You can train them, you can see their expressions, you can see them make decisions and refuse to do certain things. And they've clearly got a body because we can pick them up and cuddle them. So they are the same. So what's to say then that there's not something in one of those two invisible fields? So not the body, because you didn't reach out and touch the spider or show up a little book with a little sign on it for him to read and, oh, okay, move to the left. But what in those two invisible sides of the soul or the spirit, was there a communication going through? Because those things are intelligent too. So that's where my scientist starts to come to play, but I'm dealing with the physical and the spiritual combined in that one question, because in my opinion, science can look at all of those things because we live in a world that is of the invisible as well as the visible.
Love it.
Because I can't see gravity, for example. I can't see oxygen. I can't see a whole bunch of things. I can't see the law of thermodynamics, but we know all these things exist. So we do live in a world with the invisible as well as the visible. I can't see that quantum entanglement, but I can see the trees and I can see the spider and I can see you and all, So we have to appreciate that the world is much more than what our senses can go, oh, I've just picked up something that must be real then. But gravity, no, forget about that. Time, forget about that. Those are not real. And I mean, you can then go down an entire wormhole that says, well, maybe time isn't real or maybe gravity isn't real, but we don't need to go there today.
Okay, so we were clearly on a roll, chatting away and enjoying ourselves, but we went on for much longer and had to break it up somewhere. So make sure you join us for part 2, where we'll discuss the surprising intelligence and behaviors of fungi, plants, the mysteries of water's memory, how kingfishers inspire train designs in Japan, and how whales are helping us detect earthquakes. From interspecies friendships to biomimicry, part 2 delivers. Thanks so much for being with us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'd be so grateful if you could share it with a friend, leave a review, and rate the podcast. This really does help us reach more people in our mission to expand the global understanding, experience, and celebration of body brilliance. And just so you know, our events and content remain free in our effort to expand the meaning of intelligence, but we do gratefully accept donations to help with our operating costs. So if you have a bit extra and feel so inspired, you can find the link to support us in the show notes. While you're there, Check out all the resources we've included to help you dive deeper into today's topics. You can also visit www.thebrilliantbodypodcast.com for a complete list of episodes, body meditations, and many more brilliant things. And if you're curious to explore how I work with clients and students to reclaim body brilliance, visit my website at www.alimezey.com. And lastly, a huge hearty thank you to my co-producer and co-editor, the brilliant Florence Popoff, and to Blair, Mr. One Man Band Wilson, for our theme music. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, stay loving, and reclaim your brilliant body.